Rails is your fortnightly podcast focused on all things video game and video game adjacent. Hosted by Demi Nerd offrailgamer. This is episode 47. Please enjoy the show. What's Dr. Robotnik's favourite chocolate bar? Snickers! A nice little joke there to break the ice. Feel free to tell that one at the office if you like. Now that we've got the frivolity out of the way, we can get down to the very serious business of producing the rest of the show. Off the Rails has been acclaimed by some as the leading academic authority on video games. The history, the art, current affairs, and would you believe it, we've also been said to have the hottest gossip. And that's not just because I record it wearing nothing but a leopard print banana hammock and a coconut bra. No, I haven't shaved my legs. And now that you've brought your dinner back up, I'll get on with a bit of general housekeeping. Off the Rails goes out on whatever platform you're listening on, which could be YouTube, Castbox, Amazon Music or Spotify. If you like what you hear, unlikely after the grotesque image I painted with my words just now, do feel free to leave a 5-star rating or share it with your friends and family. Otherwise, you may wish to share this with someone who doesn't know you, secretly hate them. I don't care how word gets out, it'd just be nice to have a listener for the odd episode here and there. Guys, I finally did it. I deactivated my X account. I just got sick to my back teeth of being force-fed the ill-informed opinions of closet Nazis, otherwise known as Reform UK voters. They really are the worst kind of trash humans, spewing nothing but bile and spreading ignorance like it's COVID. But enough about those. I'm going to use strong language now. Enough about those turds. We're free of Elon's twatter and can focus on better things. Those better things being my remaining socials, to which I've posted links in the podcast episode description, YouTube, Twitch and TikTok. You'll notice there's an email address offrailgamer@gmail.com. What's that all about then? Bookings for office parties? Well, no. This is where you can write to me with any comments, queries, feedback, anecdotes, jokies, or anything that's on your mind, really. Please keep your messages clean and try to refrain from being mean. Do all that, and I just might read it out in listeners' whispers. Snickers. Tee. I hope you got a little chuckle out of that one, because there won't be any other laughs this episode. Now, you're about to hear some music which announces the newly introduced part of the show just 2 episodes ago. Wait here and I'll go and open up the Retro Marcade. Today, I'm going to talk about a game that didn't actually begin life in the arcades, but being, I think, the biggest selling game of all time, it's one you'll find in most arcades today, and we certainly have it here in the Retro Marcade. You probably already know what game we're reviewing today, but before we do that, let me just quickly explain the Retro Marcade to anyone who missed the last 2 episodes. Essentially, we pick a classic arcade game, and I give you a short rundown of the history, the gameplay, my personal experience with it, and my overall opinion of the game. This week we are of course talking Tetris, the game in which you rotate and sort shapes falling from the top of the screen so that they fit together nicely at the bottom of the screen. If you pack out a row on the grid that makes up the game screen, that line will disappear, which is how you score points. If you fail to clear rows and fill the grid to the top of the screen, it's game over. Now, these aren't your traditional shapes like pentagons, circles, etc. They wouldn't fit together very nicely. In fact, let's call them by their correct name. The tetronymos are all made up of 4 squares put together. One tetronymo lines up in a row. 2 of them make an L shape, one is sort of a T shape, there's a square, and there's one where two squares sit atop the other two, but offset to the side by one. Look, you all know Tetris, so I'm sure I don't need to sit here describing the appearance of Tetronymos to you, but I tried my best anyway. What I can do is tell you a bit about where it all started for Tetris. It's a fairly well documented story, so I won't spend an age retelling it, but it does nonetheless deserve telling, so let's have a look, shall we? The creator of Tetris, one Alexei Pajitnov, I hope I got that right, was a speech recognition and artificial intelligence researcher for the Dorodvitsin Computing Center of the Academy of Sciences in Soviet Russia. The game was originally programmed on the Electronica 60 in 1984 and licensed to Microsoft and Spectrum Holobyte in the UK and USA respectively, who each published Tetris in 1988. But it wasn't until 1989 that the most famous version was published on Nintendo Entertainment System and the Nintendo Game Boy, particularly. It was the Game Boy port that became, and from what I can tell, remains the best-selling version of Tetris, having sold more than 35 million copies! And it was on the Game Boy that I first picked up Tetris. It was actually my pa's copy of the game, and at a young age I played it just a few times, though I must admit I tended to spend a lot more time playing Super Mario Land. We also had those brick game generic handhelds that were everywhere in the 90s. When I got one of my own, as a stocking filler for Christmas one year, I started to get a greater sense of the appeal of Tetris. Though I must say that it was in much more recent years that I finally became almost addicted to Tetris 99 with Switch Online. This pits you against 98 other players. As you clear lines, you send junk to clog up other players' screens, with the goal of being the last player standing, earning the title Tetris Maximus. The game is fundamentally the same, but the competitive element really refreshed it. And look how well I've done to come this far without even mentioning the music. We all know the iconic tune, and I'd reckon it's safe to say it played no small part in making Tetris such an addictive experience. I mean, it's incredibly catchy, and all the while it's stuck in your head you can think of those Tetronymos descending and fitting together so perfectly. But what do I think of Tetris? Well, I know I'm still playing it in one form or another more than 40 years after its original conception, and I think there's very good reason for the game's popularity over the years. It's simple, it's repetitive, but it somehow isn't boring. It's not in my personal top 10 video games, as you already know from episode 27, and if you don't already know from episode 27, maybe go back and listen to that one at some point. Anyway, although it doesn't make my top 10, I still think Tetris is phenomenally good and definitely warrants the success it's seen over the years. And that's that. I'll lock up here and you can get yourself ready for what I've been playing recently. That's the part of the show in which I tell you all about some of the games that I've been playing recently. This week I have mostly been playing WWE 2K24. With the pro wrestling coming to Netflix, I really have been bitten by the old wrestling bug again. But I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and I did talk about it in the last episode. All I'll say is since we last spoke, I've reunited Farouk and Bradshaw in Universe mode, and my favourite tag team, the Acolyte Protection Agency, or APA, are currently holding the Raw Tag Team Championship. A whole lot of words that may not mean a great deal to some of you listening at home. Anyway, I do have other games to talk about, so maybe let's hasten on to some of those, shall we? My Super Nintendo or SNES collection is definitely the smallest of all my game collections, but I set out to start changing that in the last week or so, adding 3 new cartridges to what I'd say is now starting to resemble a small stack. I think I got some good ones too, and with funds being a little tight at the moment, I didn't fork over much for them either. First then, and perhaps least likely to extract a shriek of delight out of you, I picked up Tiny Toons Adventures Buster Busts Loose. I never watched Tiny Toon Adventures, so I did have to Google Buster Bunny. Apparently he's no relation, but Bugs Bunny was Buster's mentor and favourite teacher at school. Well, I don't know if I've ever said on here before, but Bugs Bunny is probably my favourite Looney Tunes character, so make of that what you will, if you're making anything at all. Buster Bust's Loose is a 2D side-scrolling platformer. It looks pleasant enough, but doesn't match the graphics of the Donkey Kong Country games, which I always herald as really showing off how good games on the SNES could look, much more so than any others I'm aware of. But I would say it's up there graphically with games like Mickey Mania. If you know, you know. I also picked up Super Mario All-Stars, which compiles 4 classic Mario games onto one cartridge: Super Mario Bros., SMB The Lost Levels, SMB 2 and SMB 3. SMB, of course, being Super Mario Bros. It's certainly enough to keep me going for a good long while, I should say. I know you can play all these on the Switch with Switch Online, but there's just something about playing games on the old hardware. Maybe only collectors will understand, but it's so nice being able to physically hold a piece of gaming history. And lastly, I grabbed Super Mario World. I mean, you have to collect Mario games for Nintendo consoles, no? Yes. I don't know much about Super Mario World, but I think it's the one where you have to sacrifice Yoshi to clear some of the jumps. If you know, you know. Anyway, I'm having fun with these so far, and if I haven't already, I will have to get them up on the channel at some point. And I kinda got back into Nintendo, honestly. I don't think I talked about it last episode, so I must have played some Cooking Mama on the Wii in a YouTube livestream. You can head over to my YouTube channel to watch the VOD under live streams. I'll be honest, I'm not the best virtual chef, and not even a patch on my culinary prowess IRL, but we did manage to successfully cook up a few different world foods, and on a couple of occasions we got the best feedback anyone could ever wish to hear in life. Wow! Even better than Mama! I think we made paella, pudding. I don't remember what we made actually, so maybe I need to go and watch the VOD as well. Or, even better, maybe I'll just play some more. It's a really fun game, and it's quite different from a lot of other titles. And then, thanks to one super nerd Simon, who I've shouted out in a recent episode, I had to go back to a couple of other games as well. One, Donkey Kong Country Returns, which I've only recently added to my game collection. I had it, in fact, recorded for a video for YouTube, but the game cap was stuttering, making it impossible to edit for upload. As such, I think I'll try streaming it instead. And the other Wii game I had to load up again was Job Island Hardworking People. I think I streamed this on YouTube a long time ago, but I might start a new game and kick off a new stream series. If you've never heard of it before, it's pretty wacky, as an asteroid is set on a collision course with Earth, and by taking on different jobs, from posing as a bodybuilder to scaring visitors in a haunted house attraction, or tailoring new clothes to risking your life as a firefighter, you can stop the asteroid. It had been absolutely ages since I played Job Island, and it was great to get back into it. As you can probably guess, it's quite a silly game, but I mean that in a good way. It has a great sense of humour about it, and although it's effectively a collection of mini-games, kinda like the Rayman Rabbids games, it's really good fun. Well, I think that's probably enough about what I've been playing recently. It's possible that I've streamed Garfield Lasagna Party and or The Brothers Remastered by the time this goes out, but that's certainly not the case at the time of scripting this segment. I tried finding some gaming news for you, but found nothing of interest, and I've had no communications this past fortnight, so we can crack on with the main part of the show. So I'll see you over there after this lovely little ditty. You'll remember in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, well, at least in the Disney animated movie this is, as I've not read the book, so I can't tell you whether the version I sort of know bears any relation to the source material. Anyway, all that's rather besides the point, so permit me please to get back to what I was saying. In Alice in Wonderland, assume I'm talking about the film adaptation, unless of course this is true to the book, in which case you may think of the literature and feel good for knowing things. Oof! That sounded really mean. I didn't mean that to come across so sarcastic, but listen, please. or we shall never get through this bit and on with the show. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice chases the white rabbit down the rabbit hole and invites herself to a tea party being hosted by none other than the Mad Hatter. And once you lock eyes on the Mad Hatter, there's something you'll instantly notice about him. He's wearing a hat, a rather large top hat at that. I assume that's what he takes his name from. But why mention all this? What's it got to do with video games? Well, I'll tell you, it has absolutely nothing to do with video games, but it does have everything to do with the subject of today's podcast, and that has everything to do with video games. Not every video game, I'll grant you, but enough of them to make it worthy of talking about in a video game podcast. And it's a topic you probably won't hear getting talked about on other video game podcasts, so hopefully you heard it here first. This week I'm going to be talking about hats, a sort of who wore it best episode, only not that at all, because I'm not comparing different characters' headwear. We're just going to be taking a look at some hats that have featured in video games. I'm going to kick things off with a top hat, in fact, as we've just been talking of the Mad Hatter. Now, here's a hat that is unlike many of the other hats in today's list, in that it's not worn by the central character, though that does not make this entry unique, as you will come to learn, but we shall see that many of the hats we're reviewing today do belong to the player character. On a quick aside, I was considering talking about Mr. Moneybags, or whatever his name is, from Monopoly, and could even have talked about the top hat piece you can play as. But, I don't know, Monopoly is a board game, and despite having had many video game outings at this point, it didn't seem right to include this in the list. First up then is the Magician from Rayman. When you load up the first Rayman game on PS1, you get a cutscene telling you what's going on, which is narrated by the Magician. He looks a little like Rayman inasmuch as his head, hands and feet aren't physically attached to his body, but beyond that it's hard to say if there are any other likenesses in their physical attributes. The Magician has long blonde hair that grows down over his tummy-tum-tum, down to around where you might expect his knees to be, if he had legs, that is. But atop his head, the Magician wears an impressive top hat that is itself as tall as he is. In fact, when we first meet him, his hat is sitting on the ground, and as it jumps up in the air, the Magician appears out of the bottom of it. Emblazoned on the front of the hat is a large gold star where the hatband would be. The Magician wears his hat low, the brim resting on his nose, so we never see his eyes. It's a bit like that seer, if you remember her, only with a hat instead of multicoloured hair. Or multi-shaded is perhaps the correct term, because something about black and white not being colours? I mean, they kind of look like colours to my eyes, but what do I know? One last thing on Rayman's The Magician, which may be of little or no interest to you, but when researching this character, I found out his full name is Ailes Mancy, and it's thought that he's also the Dark Teensy, main villain in Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends. The main thing that I hope you all take away from today, though, is that he wears a hat and is in a video game. What do you want to do now? Should we stay on PS1 or hop back in time to the SNES / Mega Drive era? Of course, that's Genesis for our North American Argonauts, who, hello by the way. I would put a smiling emoji there if I was typing this. And of course, hello to all our Argonauts the world over. Seems a bit weird to be saying hello halfway through the podcast, but there it is, and I hope you're enjoying the show. I've decided we'll jump back to the 8-bit era, as I want to talk about a hat that really should come as no surprise, making an appearance in this list. First revealed to the world in Street Fighter 2, I am of course talking about M. Bison's little hat that he wears. Allow me to describe M. Bison to you, and allow me to describe M. Bison's hat to you, all with the power of just my words, for that's what I do as your podcast host. I use my words to get my point across. Sometimes not so effectively as other times, as seems to be proving the case today. My oh my, we've been getting diverted here and there and everywhere, haven't we? M. Bison then. He's a big chap and he wears a red, what appears to be military-style uniform, and the hat matches the other garments in style. It's a red peaked military-style cap, rather similar in shape to what Captain Mannering wears in Dad's Army. You know what I'm going to say. If you know, you know. If you don't know, it's a hat that has a flat top. I describe it as a squat. It doesn't stand tall off the top of the head, and there's a lovely peak extends out slightly above the eyes, so hopefully that paints the perfect picture of what M. Bison from Street Fighter 2's hat looks like. And I tell you, it is a lovely looking hat. Now, much more recently, we saw a hat of a very different sort in a video game. It only had a bit of a cameo really, but there was a very nice mechanic behind this hat and I want to talk about it. But before we can get on to that, I first need to tell you about the hat itself. Unfortunately, the launch of Hogwarts Legacy was mired in some controversy, through no fault of the game studio or the development team, but because of the very low esteem in which the author and creator of the Harry Potter universe is held. Well, I think the less said about that the better. I, for one, didn't like to see all the hard work of the game devs go to waste over the ravings of a miserable old billionaire, so I couldn't wait to have a play. Did the game live up to expectations? Listen, I enjoyed it, but I did feel that the plot meandered this way and that, lacking any real sense of direction right up until what felt like a bit of a rushed finish. Saying that, the game world was beautiful to look at, and the controls were solid. In my opinion, it's a good game. It just wasn't quite great. But I believe it was the first game for a new studio, so I'm hoping the sequel will be an improvement on what was already a very good game. The sorting hat, then, is a fairly typical looking witchy hat with its wide brim and conical shape. Only it's a rather beat up old brown hat and its various creases look like a face, which gives it the ability to talk. The next thing about the sorting hat in Hogwarts Legacy was that before the game actually released, you could visit the website and link it to your account you'd be playing with, for example your PSN or Xbox Live account. You could then take a survey of questions that would ultimately determine what house you'd be sorted into. When playing the game, the sorting hat would choose that house to place you in. You could still choose a different house if you didn't like the result of the quiz, but I rolled with it and played through as a student of Slytherin. Hey, I thought it added a nice touch to the game. I'm not ranking these hats at all, by the way, just talking about some notable hats from video games, so next let's turn our attention to Mr. Video Game Mario. Let's face it, an icon of gaming, Mario's hat is possibly the most famous and instantly recognisable almost universally the world over. In particular though, I'm sure you'll agree it's perhaps most appropriate we talk about Cappy from Super Mario Odyssey. In Odyssey, Mario's hat has a pair of eyes which serve a greater purpose than simply making it expressive. Mario can take his hat off and throw it at pretty much anything, and anything Cappy lands on can then be possessed by Mario. No, we're not talking simple mind control or puppeteering here. Mario literally jumps into the entity or object and possesses it like something out of The Exorcist. Less vomit and swearing involved, mind. You can possess Goombas, Koopas, Bullet Bills, a T-Rex. Wait, what? Yes, early on in the game, Mario can land Cappy atop the head of a T-Rex and stomp around as the hero from Jurassic Park. And all of these possessions serve a purpose, allowing Mario to access parts of the map he might otherwise be unable to reach, or granting him powers to solve puzzles that might otherwise be unsolvable. Dissolvable? No, unsolvable. We were right the first time. I want to get into some small talk now. Don't worry, I'm not going to start talking about the weather. I want to talk about a very small character. You see, there are little blue people called Smurfs, and they've had a fair number of video games now, most recently in Smurfs Belief Party, but you know I'm going to talk about a game on a system I just can't shut up about. I've described Smurf on the Atari in a previous episode, so I'll keep the recap, no pun intended, short. Again, no pun intended. You play as a Smurf setting out to rescue Smurfette from Gargamel's castle. There are obstacles and enemies you must hop over along the way in what is a sort of watered down version of Pitfall. But don't let that description sell this game short at all. It really is good fun to play. Oh, and no pun intended. And what do Smurfs wear? Why, hats, of course. Papa Smurf wears a red hat and all the other Smurfs wear a white hat. It looks a little like a tall flop hat but with no brim. I'm not sure how better to describe it, honestly, nor whether this style of hat has a name. Nonetheless, it very much is a hat, and Atari's Smurf is most certainly a video game. So I done talked about it, and if that doesn't prove my journalistic integrity to you, well, I really don't know what will. Our next subject is known primarily for sandwiches, not making sandwiches like Cooking Mama, not eating sandwiches like Big Smoke from GTA San Andreas, but for nearly being made into a sandwich, and I am of course talking about Jill Valentine from Resident Evil. The first Resident Evil sees our favourite STARS agent seeking refuge from undead Dobermans in a large stately home, or mansion, if you will. You can choose to play as Chris Redfield, armed only with a knife, or as Jill Valentine, who starts out with a handgun. Well, as I already said, we're talking about Jill Valentine. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I don't actually hear you, that's not how podcasts work, but for anyone wondering why we're talking about Jill Valentine, it's because she fits what we're talking about. You see, crowning Jill's cranium, which is the posh word for head, is a lovely military-style beret, as opposed to an artist's beret, and a beret is a hat. Therefore, I considered Jill's beret worth a mention. A mention is all it'll get, though, as I can't think of much else to say about it. It's beret nice. No, I don't think that one landed, actually. Well, hats enough about Resident Evil. Let's just get on to the next hat, shall we? It hasn't really featured in his last two video game outings, but the fella who's next up is fairly well known for wearing a hat. Hailing from Hyrule, I am of course talking about Link, the playable protagonist from the Legend of Zelda games. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I think Link chose to let his scalp breathe after around 30 years of covering his thick golden locks? I was starting to wonder if he had concerns over his hairline. Moving on, what do you think of rhythm action games? Because way back on the PS1, there was a very famous series of rhythm action games. Well, I think he got two at least. Parappa the Rapper is a little dog who wears a bright orange beanie and likes to rap. As in hip-hop music, that is, not rapping presents, although I imagine he'd have a song for getting that done too, because that's the thing about Parappa the Rapper, is he sings about all the tasks he performs in his daily life, from cooking a stew to driving a car or learning karate from an onion. Being a rhythm action game, you must press the up, down, left, right, square, circle, X and triangle buttons when prompted and in time to the beat of the music. Failure to do so will see you having to replay the level. And try again, and again, and again. The concept is simple enough, but it's not as easy as it sounds, especially because the game's timing is usually slightly off the beat, so if you're playing along to the game's soundtrack, you'll probably get a fail. I've only got time left to talk about two more video game characters who wear hats. Next up is a man who might wear many hats over the course of his game, including a very fetching tricorn hat, although that will only earn him some very snide and judgmental comments from the NPCs, even those you thought you were chummy with. If you've been listening to Off the Rails any amount of time, you'll know that Red Dead Redemption 2 is my favourite video game I've ever played to date, and therefore you know that I am talking about Arthur Morgan and Arthur Morgan's hat. I did say that Arthur Morgan can wear many different hats in RDR2, including top hats, bowler hats, flop hats, grenadier hats made from the skins of bears that you've hunted. The choice isn't literally endless, but it is vast. As such, I think we need to focus on just one hat, and for me, Arthur just looks more at home in his hat, the hat he wears from the game's prologue. The hat is almost as iconic as the man who wears it. It's a beat-up old black leather cowboy hat with a bit of old rope wrapped around it in place of a hatband. It doesn't sound much, perhaps, the way I've just described it, but it really seems a perfect metaphor for Arthur, a bit rugged and perhaps a little unassuming looking, but perfectly effective at getting the job done, because that's what Arthur does, quietly taking care of the gang's business. Nothing showy, just doing what he needs to, doing it very well. I want to devote more time to RDR2 in a future podcast, or perhaps even in a mini-series, diving into what I love about it. For now, though, I think we should talk about our final hat. We're out of season, but I want to talk about the jolly fat man with the big white beard who travels the world handing out presents to children. Don't worry, he's not a nonce. He is, of course, Father Christmas. Jolly old Saint Nick. Santa. and I'm going to take you all the way back to the Sega Mega Drive with a game called Days Before Christmas. That being days as in dazed and confused, not the week's calendar. I can't really remember the storyline to this game, but it plays as a nice 2D side-scrolling platformer. The other nice thing is that each level is another door on an advent calendar. They really captured the theme very nicely on this cartridge. And oh, what's that Santa's wearing on his head? Could it be a hat? Why yes, it is none other than his famous red hat topped with a white bauble and white fur lining at the brim, more commonly known as a Santa hat to you and I. So there's some hats. And did you think we could really get a full episode out of the subject? It shows talent on my part, I must say. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I really do mean that. Until next time, bye!